Hello. Today it is the day before New Year's Eve, and it's snowing a lot in South Korea. Biggest snow yet this year. Um, so it's the year's end, and I've been thinking a lot about the past and the present and the future, obviously, like probably everyone is. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit today about all three of those things, but primarily the moment and what the moment means to me and uh, how it sort of moves between the three different time slots. So I'm going to begin with an excerpt from Seneca's On the Shortness of Life. I think this is very poignant, and lately I've been getting into the Stoic philosophers a lot. So because I'm in Asia, a few years ago I started researching Taoism a lot, and there is definitely a connection between the two philosophies, even though one is Eastern and one is Western. So I think that's really where my mind has been at the last probably 2 or 3 years. But let's go ahead and read that, and then we'll discuss this more.
Life is divided into three periods: that which has been, that which is, that which will be. Of these, the present time is short, the future is doubtful, the past is certain. For the last is the one over which fortune has lost control, is the one which cannot be brought back under any man's power. But men who are engrossed lose this, for they have no time to look back upon the past, and even if they should have, it is not pleasant to recall something they must view with regret. They are therefore unwilling to direct their thoughts backward to ill-spent hours, and those whose vices become obvious if they review the past, even the vices which were disguised under some allurement of momentary pleasure, do not have the courage to revert to those hours. No one willingly turns his thoughts back to the past, unless all his acts have been submitted to the censorship of his conscience, which is never deceived. He who has ambitiously coveted, proudly scorned, recklessly conquered, treacherously betrayed, greedily seized, or lavishly squandered must needs fear his own memory. And yet this is part of our time that is sacred and set apart, put beyond the reach of all human mishaps, and removed from the dominion of fortune, the part which is disquieted by no want, by no fear, by no acts of disease. This can neither be troubled nor be snatched away. It is an everlasting and unanxious possession. The present offers only one day at a time, and each by minutes. But all the days of past time will appear when you bid them. They will suffer you to behold them and keep them at your will, a thing which those who are engrossed have no time to do. The mind that is untroubled and tranquil has the power to roam into all the parts of its life, but the minds of the engrossed, just as if weighted by a yoke, cannot turn and look behind. And so their life vanishes into an abyss. And as it does no good, no matter how much water you pour into a vessel, if there's no bottom to receive and hold it, so with time, it makes no difference how much is given. If there is nothing for it to settle upon, it passes out through the chinks and holes of the mind. Present time is very brief, so brief indeed that to some there seems to be none, for it is always in motion, it ever flows and hurries on, it ceases to be before it has come, and can no more brook delay than the firmament or the stars, whose ever unresting movement never lets them abide in the same track. The engrossed, therefore, are concerned with present time alone, and it is so brief that it cannot be grasped, and even this is filched away from them, distracted as they are among many things. In a word, do you want to know how they do not live long? See how eager they are to live long. Decrepit old men beg in their prayers for the addition of a few more years. They pretend that they are younger than they are. They comfort themselves with a falsehood and are pleased to deceive themselves as if they have deceived fate at the same time. But when at last some infirmity has reminded them of their mortality, in what terror do they die, feeling that they are being dragged out of life, and not merely leaving it. They cry out that they have been fools because they have not really lived, and that they will live henceforth in leisure if only they escape from this illness. Then at last they reflect how uselessly they have striven for things which they did not enjoy, and how all their toil has gone for nothing. For those whose life is passed remote from all business, why should it not be ample? None of it is assigned to another, none of it is scattered in this direction and that, none of it is committed to fortune, none of it perishes from neglect, none is subtracted by wasteful giving, none of it is unused, the whole of it, so to speak, yields income. And so, however small the amount of it, it is abundantly sufficient, and therefore, whenever his last day shall come, the wise man will not hesitate to go to meet death with steady step.
Okay, I'm going to start with the past, obviously. That's one of the hardest things to wrap your head around, I feel. I think when you're younger, the past seems nearer, but the older you get and the further away things move away from you, they sort of take on new meanings as you mature and find how these pivotal events sort of stick with you. And obviously, the more mundane events just kind of go away, but certain people and certain experiences become more and more important as you think about them more and have more life experience. So I think often when you're in these experiences, you don't really understand the gravity of them, and usually we're so wrapped up in what's to come that we don't really stop and appreciate these moments when they're happening. And maybe that's a big lesson of life, is to try to be present inside those moments. But that is always hard because, if you're in a relationship, you're sort of thinking about what the next step is, or maybe you're dissatisfied with it, or maybe you want to improve it somehow, but you're not actually being in the present and appreciating those things as you're living them often. The other thing with the past is, I think there are a lot of ghosts in the past, things that haunt you, and Dickens' A Christmas Carol, that's pretty much what that's all about. So to really understand it, just read that, I guess. But around this time of the year, you definitely sort of cope or assess the mistakes you've made, or even the successes you've made. And sometimes the successes even can be kind of hollow. As you age, you sort of see how these things at the time might have meant a lot to you, but as you've moved on, their importance has diminished. But I think the main thing about the past is that it's a tool to help you move forward and see, obviously, what not to do, but also how to become a better person and a more mature person, obviously. But obviously that's hard because, a lot of people get lost in the past, and, everyone has their moments of reminiscence where they're trying to cope with something. And this time of year obviously makes that hard for a lot of people, because you never really know, like, each new year brings its new challenges. Obviously the last few years have been very challenging, but I think at this time of year everyone wants this sort of hope for the future, and I think I'll talk about the future now, and I'll discuss the present last. So with the future, I'm going to read a quick quote from the Tao Te Ching. Success is as dangerous as failure. Hope is as hollow as fear. I think that's a really profound statement. When we think of the future, we're always sort of hoping for something new that will improve our lives in some way. And, maybe it's not really about that. I feel like fate often is going to take us wherever it wants us to go, regardless of our hopes or our dreams. So, having a plan is always good, but not being disappointed when the plan doesn't happen the way you think, I think is also very wise. And hope is something, I think I'm challenging myself with. Maybe the last 10 or 20 years, I've always been thinking like conquering my fear. Moving out to Asia was a big challenge, and there was a lot of fear. Going to different countries, places like Cambodia or somewhere where I went, there was a lot of fear. And, conquering those things were really good for me, but I think I was so focused a long time on conquering fear that I didn't really realize that hope and fear are very similar. They're almost opposites. And I think this quote actually makes you really understand that success and failure and hope and fear, they're just two things that we almost create in our mind, but they're not real. They're just these manifestations of our desires or our fear of our mortality. Or not just our mortality, but our hearts too, because a lot of fear comes from our hearts and what we're trying to either limit in ourselves, or some people are obviously very afraid of success, or I guess myself included to some degree. But I think, trying to harness those two things, hope and fear, if you can get past them, then maybe you're in an equilibrium. Maybe you're in the center, in like a stillness. And I guess that would be serenity. But obviously that's very hard to do because events are sort of toppling off your serenity, and people often challenge your serenity. So I think the only thing I can say about that is every day just keep trying to examine the fears in your life and the hopes that you have. A lot of times when you have a hope for something, you think it's taking you down a road that's going to be beneficial for you, but sometimes it's not. So what do they say? Be careful what you wish for. Like the monkey's paw, or something like a story like that. So with that, I'm just going to say a quick thing about the present, and maybe the snow here is a good example of that, of just trying to appreciate something that is transient, but beautiful at the time that it's happening. And I think trying to live in the present is a very hard thing to do, but maybe that's where meditation comes in. Or lately I've been fermenting a lot of vegetables, and there's a certain tranquility about cutting the vegetables and preparing them, knowing that the ferment could take, and if it does, that's great, but if it doesn't, then it didn't happen. And I still had the enjoyment of, the meditative enjoyment of going through the process. And I would also say the same thing about my writing and art, even walking. Like, those are all very meditative practices, and they definitely get you into the moment and to help you appreciate the moment. I guess what I'm saying at the end of this year is just try to be present, be aware, appreciate the people around you, appreciate the events that happen to you, because life is short. That's all I got for today. Take care. Happy New Year.